Welcome back, friends. Today's reading, September 4, 2019, by Swami Kriyananda from his book Living Wisely, Living Well. Look at or imagine a river flowing constantly. Then visualize your thoughts flowing similarly, not rippling restlessly, not drifting sluggishly, not frozen in fixed opinions like an ice sheet in winter time. Adapt yourself to circumstances. The more centered you are in yourself, the easier you will find it to change as the needs arise. Affirm silently, I adapt like flowing water to new situations and ideas. What a powerful and beautiful imagination, that of a flowing river. A river, in fact, symbolizes a consciousness that is not attached to anything. And this ability to flow through life, we will realize, friends, is a very essential skill. As we know, change is a law of life. They say the only constant in life is change. And we experience change in many ways. Changing seasons, day flows into night, night flows into day. The body replaces millions of cells every moment. In fact, it is said that even before I finished this sentence, probably 50 million cells would have died and replaced itself. So the change that surrounds us, around us, and the changes that are taking place within us are a reality that we cannot escape from. And Swamiji here talks about the various, now there are various ways in which we can approach this topic, but I will take up the few points that Swamiji mentions in this particular reading. What is it that stands in the way of man being able to adapt himself to circumstances, of man being able to rise to the occasion of a new idea, of a challenging circumstance? Swamiji here mentions one of them, restless ripples of thoughts. Imagine yourself, you're starting a day and you have set a good plan for your day, and you go into your office or you're at home, and your routine is stacked, you're immersed in that flow. And as you are completely immersed in this flow, you are called to attend an unexpected meeting. And you say yes, and you suddenly find yourself in this meeting. And as you're in this meeting, you're suddenly thinking to yourself, oh, I have to send this out in an hour's time. I've got to finish this, I've got to finish that. And instead of being able to enjoy or being able to contribute to the meeting, you are self-occupied in needless worries and anxieties. I found myself recently in a similar situation, but fortunately, I suddenly reminded myself of what I was doing, that I recall to myself the thoughts that were churning in my mind, and I asked myself, how is this helping me in this present moment? That all of yoga science states that we need to be present in this moment. So I took a deep breath, and with a deep exhalation, let go of all those thoughts that were cramming my mind. And mentally, I prepared myself an alternative plan that would accommodate this change in circumstances. And then I allowed myself to be completely present for that meeting. And immediately, friends, there was a great inner release. I felt a great sense of freedom that, this feels so much better than being tight, than being tense, than thinking about the next thing. And as Swamiji says, if we don't remind ourselves from time to time, because we are less aware in our present state of consciousness, sometimes we need to remind ourselves of certain principles that will take us back to a certain spiritual way of being. And for me, the moment I realized that my thoughts were getting out of hand and that I was completely uneasy, I realized that I had to curb that process, or to rather stop that process and get into a more harmonious flow, which was to make myself present in that moment. How many times we would find ourselves in similar circumstances, and yoga science gives us keys, gives us tips on how to do it. And towards the end of this discussion, we'll discuss other ways of on how to adapt ourselves to circumstances. But I'm also reminded of the story of Viktor Frankl. Many of us know of Viktor as a psychiatrist, as a neurologist, but above all as a Holocaust survivor. And his book, Man's Search for Meaning, is very popular. And in that, you will find a very beautiful statement where he says that in between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. And in the response we choose lies our inner freedom. Isn't that a beautiful thought? That in the moment between stimulus and response, we have the power to choose. And how we choose to respond will determine the degree of inner freedom we can bring to any moment at will. The next point Swamiji mentions here is not drifting sluggishly. When do we tend to drift sluggishly? Often it is when we are confused, sometimes we are lazy, sometimes we are overwhelmed by the situation at hand, and sometimes the circumstances have already overwhelmed us, and we simply resign ourselves to that fate, that, oh, let's flow with whatever is trying to happen. This is destiny, this is fate. I am always inspired by the life of Swami Kriyananda. As some of us may know, Swamiji was was rather ousted from his guru's founding work early in his life, and it was a very difficult period for him. In his own words, it was the dark night of his soul. He struggled for a few years and considered becoming a hermit, but God had other plans for him. And but slowly and gradually, through self-effort and divine grace, he started giving classes, Sunday services. He began writing music, did extensive research on a book that he was contemplating on. And over the next 50, 60 plus years of his life of discipleship to his Guru Paramahansa Yogananda, he became known worldwide as the father of intentional communities, because he had founded 8 spiritual intentional communities, many yoga and meditation centers worldwide, written over 150 books and 400 plus pieces of music. A sterling example of how, when we are sometimes faced with a monstrous wave that almost threatens to annihilate us, if we can ride the crest of that wave with willpower, with self-effort, divine grace takes us by our hand and leads us to freedom, even complete freedom itself, as the life of Swami Kriyananda shows. So to not drift sluggishly, but to take the circumstance, the situation in our hands, and to offer it all we have got, and to transcend it through attunement with divine will take us a long way in overcoming the challenge of sluggish thoughts and actions. Then Swamiji mentions frozen and fixed opinions. When do we become fixed? When we have attachments, when we have very strong likes and dislikes, when we have strong desires, isn't it? So, one day I was standing by a window, and I was just looking at the street close by, and I saw a lady cleaning the street. And a thought just occurred to me that if I were to be reborn, and if I were to find myself cleaning a street, if that was the role I was playing in that life, would I spend that life trying to raise myself up the social ladder? Would I spend that life trying to make more money and eke out a living? What would I do? Or would I be conscious of the presence of God within and be able to enjoy that work, that service, as an offering to God? It was a thought that startled me. And at that moment, I remember praying to God for the divine grace to be reminded of His presence always, and to never lose sight of that greater reality which we can sometimes forget when we are consumed by our ego self. But I remember that moment reminding myself of my little self definitions and of the need to transcend them. Gradually, it's not a matter of a day or of a few weeks or months. Sometimes this is a work of a lifetime. But to constantly remind myself that while we go through life through these various self-definitions, to constantly remind ourselves that this is not the final reality, that the only reality is God alone. And I realized also that without God, there is no clarity in life. We may think, oh, this is right for me, that this is the best thing for me to do, that I like this or I dislike this. And we think that, oh, you made a great decision. But I've come to realize one of those most important understandings for me personally, that without God, there is no clarity. I am lucky, I would say, to witness a beautiful success story of a friend, of a dear friend. He's a five-star master chef who has worked in some of the international hotels, five-star international hotels worldwide. A wonderful man, beautiful heart, loves to be materially flamboyant, likes to have the latest gadgets, cooks delicious food, some of the best I ever had. Was a wonderful friend of Swami Kriyananda too. Now, a year or so back, difficult work situations found him out of a job, and he wouldn't compromise on his ideals. And he was back to humble circumstances, and he was also featured on on the cover of one of the international magazines. So suddenly, from a very high-profile life, he found himself in very humble circumstances. Being the spendthrift that he was, he didn't have much money on him. But slowly again, through self-effort, through being open to opportunities that came his way, not defining himself in any fixed particular ways, he slowly worked himself out of his circumstances, found a suitable partnership through his gift of making friendships and expanding a circle of influence. And today he's a prosperous man again. Over 60 years, he shows us how to be youthful, and his principle is energy and how to flow with energy. What a beautiful example again of how not to be fixed in your perception of who you are, and what you can become. Many such stories often end in frustrations, suicides, disappointments, depressions. So for us friends to remind ourselves, as Swamiji says in this reading, the more centered you are in yourself, the easier you will find it to change as the needs arise. How do we live in ourselves? Yoga tells us that the center of, in fact, Yogananda ji writes in the autobiography of a yogi, that he said that the center of the universe is a point of intuitive perception in your heart. That the center of our happiness, of the universe, is not out there in that person or in that object or in that opportunity. It is right within ourselves. That all that we are seeking outside, whether it is money, fame, whether it is friendships, relationships, they are all forms of energy of love, of joy, of power, of wisdom, of light. They are all forms of energy that already are part of our reality. But consumed by our ego consciousness, we often see only a little part of the reality. But we are already part of a greater flow of truth. And our ability to change comes from our adherence, from our commitment to truth, that greater reality which is already guiding and directing a flow. And Yogananda ji says again in the first line of his autobiography that man's search for meaning can only be found in the eternal Guru disciple guru relationship, that we cannot uh, release ourselves from this consciousness of our little self through our own efforts. Like Swamiji would say, you cannot lift the chair on which you're sitting. Someone who is not on that chair has to lift you up. So similarly, someone who is transcended the consciousness of ego, somebody who is already one with the ocean of spirit, that is a Sadguru, needs to draw us out of our ego consciousness, needs to draw us into a higher flow. Alfred Lord Tennyson himself recognized that greater reality when he said that I am a part of all that is. And for us to remind ourselves that there is a greater reality of which we are a part, and that we need to be sensitive to what that greater flow may be and where we stand in that greater flow. We can stand on the leading crest of that wave when we are attuned with the divine will. But often man, because of ignorance, lack of awareness, we do not know what the divine flow is. We do not know what the divine will or guidance is. And that is why the importance of a true guru. As many as those who received him, to them gave he the power to become sons of God. When we accept the divine guidance, the wisdom of a guru, the guru leads us forward into that divine flow, into the ocean of spirit. And without the guru, friends, it is a maze that we often struggle to find our way out of. It is a very, very hard struggle without a guru. So if we are keen on wanting to find meaning in our lives, to find that greater flow that is trying to flow through us and take us forward, receive the guidance of a guru. Let's keep our hearts open. Let's keep our mind open to the wisdom guided will of our guru through daily meditation. There is an ancient practice called Hong Saw, and the Sanskrit translation of Hong Saw is Aham Saha, or I am spirit. The spirit is that greater reality, that ocean, and the I is often that little consciousness of the ego which keeps forming stagnant pools of its own. But the more we can meditate and dip ourselves in that ocean of spirit through regular meditation, the more we are cleansed of those egoic likes and dislikes that thwart the greater reality, and we find ourselves flowing towards the ocean by the Guru's grace. Let's before we close this session, do a little visualization of this inspiration of Swamiji as he says, let's imagine a river flowing constantly. See that river flowing joyfully, busily rippling downwards, carrying away all debris with it. The debris of our past tendencies, samskars, habits. And as it carries away those tendencies, those habits, let them go. Allow yourself to be free. And as you continue to flow, see the greater flow of divine grace, strengthening that flow of the river in your spine. Now that flow grows closer and closer to the ocean. The Guru's grace leading that flow. The Guru's grace keeps that flow, or rather protects that flow from other egoic ripples that may tend to draw it away from its destined course towards the ocean. Allow the Guru to take charge of the flow. And now see the river united with the ocean at the point between the eyebrows. In deep meditation, as the breath calms down and the energy is sucked into the deep spine, the natural flow of the energy is from the lower centers in our body to the higher center, to the point between the eyebrows. And that river is God's joy, God's eternal infinite love coursing through us. Let's visualize that infinite love filling our bones, muscles, tissues, our whole body. Filling our hearts with deep love for the gift of circumstances, no matter how difficult they may seem. They are the Guru's gift. That allows the stagnant pool of our ego consciousness to release those waters into the greater flow of the river of spirit. Inwardly practice gratitude for all those moments in your life when you have faced challenges, or if you are facing one, to be able to turn with faith to the Guru and say, thank you. Inviting him to guide you to inner freedom. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.